Vanessa Caldwell believed that tonight would be remembered as the evening she finally proved who truly controlled the company. But before the last champagne glass was raised, she would discover that the quiet woman standing outside the ballroom doors had the power to end her entire career. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The skyline of Chicago shimmered against the night sky as hundreds of guests arrived at the Grand Monarch Hotel for the most anticipated corporate gala of the year. Crystal chandeliers glowed through towering glass windows. Luxury sedans lined the entrance. Executives, investors, and board members stepped onto the red carpet dressed in custom suits and designer gowns, all eager to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Hays Innovations, one of the fastest-growing technology companies in America. Inside the ballroom, waiters moved between marble columns carrying silver trays while a jazz quartet played softly beneath golden lights. Everything about the evening projected success, prestige, and power. Standing near the entrance, Vanessa Caldwell watched the arrivals with a satisfied smile. As acting chairwoman of the board, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who believed the future belonged to her. Her elegant black gown, diamond earrings, and carefully rehearsed smile drew admiration from everyone who passed. She accepted compliments effortlessly, shaking hands and greeting investors as if she already owned the company. Across the street, however, another woman approached the hotel unnoticed. Madison Hays wore a simple navy dress and a light gray coat. There were no bodyguards around her, no luxury entourage, and nothing about her appearance suggested extraordinary wealth. At 38 years old, she looked more like a school administrator than the founder of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. She walked calmly toward the entrance, her eyes reflecting the lights of the building she had once dreamed about while working late nights in a tiny rented office. Few people inside knew her face. Even fewer knew the sacrifices she had made to build Hays Innovations from a two-person startup into a global powerhouse. As Madison stepped onto the red carpet, conversations slowed. Some guests glanced at her briefly before looking away. Others assumed she had wandered into the wrong event. Near the entrance, Security Chief Ethan Walker frowned as he watched her approach. Vanessa noticed the woman as well. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Recognition quickly buried beneath calculation. She leaned toward Ethan and quietly said something that caused him to straighten immediately. The security chief nodded and stepped forward. Madison continued walking, unaware that dozens of eyes were beginning to follow her. The music played on. Laughter echoed through the lobby. Yet beneath the elegance of the evening, an invisible tension had begun to form. Ethan blocked Madison's path just before she reached the ballroom doors. His expression remained professional, but cold. "Good evening, ma'am," he said. "Before you go any further, I'll need to verify whether you actually belong at this event." The room seemed to pause for a single heartbeat as Madison slowly lifted her eyes to meet his. And several feet away, Vanessa Caldwell smiled. Madison held Ethan Walker's gaze without the slightest sign of panic. Around them, conversations had quieted into curious whispers. The nearest guests pretended not to stare, yet their attention remained fixed on the unexpected confrontation unfolding beside the ballroom entrance. The glow of crystal chandeliers reflected across the marble floor as Madison spoke calmly. "I belong here," she said. "In fact, I have every right to attend this event." Ethan maintained his professional posture, though uncertainty briefly crossed his face. "I understand, ma'am, but I still need to verify your invitation." Madison nodded. "Then verify it." Several guests exchanged amused looks. To them, she appeared completely out of place among the wealthy executives and board members entering the celebration. Vanessa Caldwell stepped closer, her expression composed and gracious enough to fool anyone who did not know her true intentions. "We appreciate your cooperation," she said with a polished smile. "These events require strict security. I am sure this is simply a misunderstanding." Madison looked directly at her. For a fraction of a second, neither woman spoke. Vanessa's smile never moved. "A misunderstanding," Madison repeated quietly. That is one way to describe it. Ethan checked his tablet. His brow tightened. He searched again. Then a third time. The silence around them grew heavier. I cannot find your name on the guest list, he finally said. A murmur spread through the nearby crowd. Vanessa tilted her head sympathetically. Perhaps you registered under another name? Madison answered immediately. No, my name is Madison Hayes. The reaction was subtle but noticeable. A few people frowned. Others looked confused. One investor laughed softly under his breath. Hayes Innovations had thousands of employees. To most people, Madison Hayes was little more than a name in company history presentations. Very few had ever seen a recent photograph of the founder. Vanessa gave a small shrug. That is certainly an interesting coincidence. More laughter followed. Madison remained perfectly still. Across the lobby, a young event coordinator named Rachel Bennett watched the scene unfold. Rachel had joined the company only 8 months earlier. She remembered seeing an old leadership video during orientation. There was something familiar about the woman standing at the entrance. Rachel felt a knot forming in her stomach. Yet every time she considered speaking up, she looked toward Vanessa and lost her nerve. Vanessa carried enormous influence. Challenging her publicly could destroy a career before it truly began. Meanwhile, Ethan seemed increasingly uncomfortable. Ma'am, he said carefully. Without verification, I cannot allow entry. Then contact corporate records, Madison replied. We're legal. Vanessa's smile sharpened almost invisibly. That seems unnecessary for a guest. List issue. A wealthy board member standing nearby folded his arms. If she is important, someone would recognize her. Several others nodded. The room seemed to lean toward Vanessa's version of reality. Madison noticed it too. The assumptions. The judgment. The certainty that appearance determined status. Yet she refused to argue. That composure somehow irritated Vanessa even more. She had expected embarrassment. She had expected retreat. Instead, Madison stood there as though she belonged more than anyone else in the building. Vanessa finally made a decision. She stepped toward the center of the entrance area and raised her voice just enough for dozens of nearby guests to hear. Since there appears to be confusion, she announced, let us resolve this publicly. The crowd fell silent. Even the musicians seemed quieter. Vanessa turned back toward Madison and delivered the request she had been waiting to make all evening. If you truly claim a right to be here, she said, then tell everyone exactly why. The question hung in the air like a spotlight suddenly aimed at a single person. Every conversation near the ballroom entrance stopped. Madison Hayes could feel dozens of eyes fixed on her, waiting for an answer. Vanessa Caldwell stood confidently with her hands folded, appearing calm and reasonable while carefully positioning Madison as the source of the disturbance. It was a strategy designed to make the crowd choose sides. You want me to explain why I belong here? Madison asked quietly. Yes, Vanessa replied. Please. We would all love to understand. A few guests chuckled. Others lifted their glasses and watched with open curiosity. The atmosphere no longer felt like a corporate celebration. It felt like a public test. Madison glanced around the lobby. The faces staring back at her reflected skepticism, amusement, and judgment. I have a long history with this company, she answered. Longer than most people in this room. A board member near the front smirked. That does not explain why your name is missing from the guest list. Another executive nodded. Anyone can make claims. The comments triggered a wave of agreement. Madison remained composed. But the pressure continued building. Nearby, Rachel Bennett watched anxiously. The woman's calm confidence felt strangely familiar. Then Rachel noticed something unexpected. As Madison adjusted the sleeve of her coat, a small silver lapel pin became visible. It was not expensive or flashy. Most people ignored it completely. Rachel did not. The pin displayed the original Hayes Innovations logo, a design retired nearly 20 years earlier and known only to the earliest employees. Rachel remembered seeing it in company archives during orientation training. Her pulse quickened. Why would a random guest be wearing something so specific? Before she could process the thought, Vanessa stepped forward again. Perhaps you worked here many years ago, she suggested politely. There is no shame in that. But this evening is reserved for invited guests. Madison looked directly at her. You know exactly who I am. The statement landed heavily. Vanessa's smile flickered for the briefest moment before recovering. I am afraid I do not. Several people laughed again. Ethan Walker shifted uncomfortably. The situation no longer felt like a simple security issue. Yet he followed Vanessa's lead, aware of her authority. Madison slowly reached into her purse. Instantly, several guests leaned forward. She removed a worn leather card holder and opened it. Inside was a simple business card. Nothing about it looked impressive. No gold lettering. No luxury branding. Just a name and an old company emblem. Madison held it briefly before slipping it back inside. Rachel caught a glimpse of the card and felt her stomach drop. The signature printed beneath the logo matched the one displayed beneath the founder's portrait in company training materials. A hush settled over her thoughts. Meanwhile, the crowd remained unconvinced. "A business card proves nothing," someone called out. More agreement followed. Vanessa sensed the momentum shifting in her favor. The embarrassment she wanted was finally taking shape. She turned toward a nearby event manager and extended her hand. "Bring me the microphone," she said. The manager hesitated but obeyed. As the microphone was placed into Vanessa's hand, the room grew quieter than before. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead. The jazz music faded into the background. Vanessa lifted the microphone toward her lips and smiled at the crowd. Then she looked directly at Madison and prepared to make her humiliation impossible for anyone in the ballroom to ignore. Vanessa Caldwell lifted the microphone with the confidence of someone who believed the room already belonged to her. The soft music faded completely as hundreds of guests turned their attention toward the entrance. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across the ballroom, illuminating every curious face. Vanessa smiled warmly, but there was something cold beneath it. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "I apologize for this interruption. We appear to have a situation involving an individual attempting to enter a private corporate event without proper authorization." A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. Several guests looked directly at Madison Hayes. Others exchanged knowing smiles. The assumptions came easily. The woman in the simple navy dress did not look like someone who belonged among executives, investors, and board members. Vanessa continued, "Our company values professionalism, security, and respect for established procedures. Unfortunately, those procedures apply to everyone." Light applause followed from a few corners of the room. Madison stood quietly beside the entrance, neither embarrassed nor defensive. Ethan Walker shifted his weight uncomfortably. The situation felt wrong now, but he remained silent. Nearby, Rachel Bennett watched with growing anxiety. Every instinct told her that something was deeply off about what she was witnessing. Vanessa lowered the microphone and looked directly at Madison. "For the comfort of our guests, I am asking you to leave the premises." The words landed with deliberate force. A hush fell over the ballroom. Even those who had been smiling moments earlier seemed surprised by how public the humiliation had become. Madison looked around the room. She saw investors she had once personally recruited, executives who worked inside a company she had built from nothing, employees who had never met her but benefited from the culture she spent years creating. Yet not one person stepped forward. Not one person challenged the narrative unfolding before them. Vanessa waited. "Well," she asked, "do you intend to cooperate?" Madison remained calm. Her expression did not harden. Her voice did not rise. Instead, she answered with a quiet dignity that seemed strangely powerful against the noise of judgment surrounding her. A person does not lose their place simply because others forget how they got there. The room went silent. Not the uncomfortable silence of confusion. Something deeper. Several guests lowered their eyes. Others frowned as though the words had struck a place they did not want to examine. Vanessa recovered first. "That is a very poetic answer," she said with a thin smile. "But it changes nothing." Madison nodded slowly. "Perhaps not tonight." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Vanessa's face. It disappeared almost instantly. She gestured toward the doors. "Then I must insist." Ethan stepped aside and opened a path toward the exit. Madison looked at him and offered a small, gracious nod that somehow made him feel worse. Without another argument, she turned and began walking away from the ballroom. No protest, no scene, no anger, just quiet composure. The crowd parted as she crossed the marble lobby. The sound of her footsteps echoed softly beneath the chandeliers. Rachel watched her leave and felt an unexpected ache in her chest. Outside the massive glass entrance, the cool Chicago night stretched across the city skyline. Madison stopped on the front steps and looked back at the building glowing with celebration. Through the glass, she could see people returning to their conversations as though nothing important had happened. Then she reached into her purse, removed her phone, and calmly sent a single message. Moments later, a black sedan turned onto the hotel driveway. Madison Hayes stood alone on the broad stone steps outside the Grand Monarch Hotel as the glow of the Gala shimmered behind the glass walls. Inside, laughter continued. Music returned. Conversations resumed. It was as if the woman who had built the company being celebrated had never existed. Yet Madison did not look angry. She looked thoughtful. The cool Chicago air brushed against her coat as she lowered her phone and gazed across the city skyline. 20 years. That was what tonight represented. Not a business milestone. Not a stock valuation. Not a board achievement. 20 years earlier, she had stood in a cramped office barely larger than a storage room with a folding table, 2 borrowed computers, and a promise she made to someone she would never forget. Her father had been a factory supervisor who worked long hours and believed that success meant creating opportunities for other people. Before he passed away, he told her something she carried every day of her life. If you ever build something important, make sure people matter more than titles. Those words had become the foundation of Hayes Innovations. Every scholarship program, every employee support initiative, every promotion policy. Tonight had mattered because it marked the anniversary of that promise. Not one person inside the ballroom knew that. The hotel doors opened behind her. Madison turned and saw Rachel Bennett step outside. The young event coordinator looked nervous. She hesitated before approaching. "Ms. Hayes," she said softly. Madison offered a gentle smile. "You remembered the name." Rachel nodded. "I think I know who you are." For a moment, neither spoke. The city traffic hummed in the distance. Rachel looked embarrassed. "I should have said something earlier." Madison shook her head. "You do not need to apologize for someone else's choices." Rachel looked down. It still felt wrong. Madison's expression softened. "The fact that it felt wrong means you are paying attention. Never lose that." Rachel blinked in surprise. She had expected bitterness. Instead, she found kindness. "I do not understand how you can stay so calm," she admitted. Madison glanced toward the ballroom windows where executives moved beneath golden chandeliers. "Because anger rarely reveals character," she said. "Moments like this do." Rachel followed her gaze. The words settled heavily in her mind. Then she noticed the old silver company pin again. Under the hotel lights, it seemed. Almost symbolic now, a quiet reminder of a history most people had forgotten. Inside the ballroom, the celebration continued. Outside, a different atmosphere was beginning to form. Madison's phone vibrated once. She checked the screen. No smile. No dramatic reaction. Just a small nod. Rachel noticed it immediately. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Yes," Madison replied. "I believe it is about to be." The air seemed different somehow. Even Rachel felt it. A subtle shift. A tension she could not explain. Then a distant sound echoed through the circular hotel driveway. Low. Smooth. Deliberate. Both women turned toward the street. One black sedan appeared. Then a second. Then another. The vehicles moved slowly beneath the hotel lights, their polished surfaces reflecting the skyline. Valets stopped talking. Security guards straightened instinctively. Through the glass walls, several guests inside the ballroom began looking toward the entrance. The atmosphere changed in an instant. And for the first time that evening, Madison Hayes was not the only person standing outside who seemed completely certain about what would happen next. The 3 black sedans rolled to a smooth stop beneath the hotel entrance canopy, their arrival drawing attention without a single flashing light or dramatic gesture. Sometimes true authority did not announce itself. It simply appeared, and the room adjusted. Rachel Bennett watched as the first door opened. A silver-haired woman stepped out carrying a leather portfolio. Behind her came 2 men in tailored suits and another woman holding a tablet. None of them looked like celebrities. None looked interested in attention. Yet Ethan Walker immediately recognized one of them. His posture straightened. "That is Allison Grant," he whispered under his breath. Rachel frowned. The name sounded familiar. Then she remembered. Allison Grant was the lead attorney who had represented Hayes Innovations during several of its largest acquisitions. She reported only to the highest levels of company leadership. More doors opened. Another figure emerged, Robert Mercer, one of the company's earliest investors and a board member whose influence extended far beyond the organization. Several employees inside the ballroom noticed him through the glass and suddenly stopped talking. The atmosphere shifted before anyone had spoken a single word. Madison remained calm. She did not wave. She did not call attention to herself. She simply stood waiting as the group approached. Allison Grant reached her first. "Good evening, Ms. Hayes," she said. "Sorry for the delay." Rachel felt her heart skip. Ethan froze. The words seemed to echo louder than they should have. "Ms. Hayes. Not a coincidence. Not a misunderstanding." The woman standing outside had been addressed with complete certainty. Through the ballroom windows, more people were beginning to notice. Conversations faded. Heads turned. Vanessa Caldwell, standing near the center of the ballroom with the microphone still in her hand, watched the scene unfolding outside. At first she looked annoyed, then confused, then something else, something far less comfortable. Robert Mercer stopped in front of Madison and offered a respectful nod. "I came as soon as I received your message." Madison smiled faintly. "Thank you for coming." The exchange was simple, but it carried the weight of long history. Rachel noticed that every person who arrived treated Madison with quiet deference. Not because they feared her, because they respected her. Inside, Vanessa lowered the microphone. Her confidence was beginning to crack. She turned toward a fellow board member. "What is happening?" she asked. The man did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on Robert Mercer outside the glass. "I think," he said carefully, "you may want to find out." The ballroom had become noticeably quieter now. Guests drifted toward the windows. Executives exchanged nervous glances. Ethan looked from Madison to Allison Grant and back again. Pieces were beginning to fall into place. The old company pin, the business card, the confidence, the name. Every detail he had dismissed suddenly felt significant. Allison opened her portfolio and removed several documents. Madison glanced at them briefly. Then she looked through the glass directly at the ballroom, where Vanessa stood frozen among hundreds of guests. A hush seemed to settle over the entire building. Even from outside, everyone could feel it. The balance of power had shifted. Vanessa knew it. Ethan knew it. Rachel knew it. And deep down, so did every executive watching from inside. Madison handed the documents back to Allison and calmly walked toward the entrance. As the doors opened before her, she spoke a single sentence that sent a chill through the room. "I believe it is time the board reviewed who actually owns this company." The ballroom doors remained open as Madison Hayes walked inside, accompanied by Allison Grant and Robert Mercer. The transformation in the room was immediate. Moments earlier, guests had watched her with amusement and suspicion. Now they watched with uncertainty. Vanessa Caldwell stood frozen near the stage, the microphone lowered at her side. The confidence that had carried her through the evening was beginning to erode. Allison stepped forward first. Her voice was calm and precise. "For the record, Madison Hayes remains the largest voting shareholder of Hayes Innovations and retains authority under the company charter approved by this board." A murmur swept through the ballroom. Several board members exchanged startled looks. Others immediately reached for their phones. Robert Mercer opened a folder and placed several documents on a nearby table. "The records have been verified," he said. "There is no dispute." The room went silent. Vanessa stared at the papers as though they belonged to another reality. "That cannot be correct," she said. "We were told her voting control had been diluted years ago." Allison looked directly at her. "You were told incorrectly." Rachel Bennett felt her breath catch. Around her, executives who had ignored Madison only minutes earlier now struggled to meet her gaze. Ethan Walker lowered his eyes, realizing he had helped remove the very person whose name was engraved on the company's founding documents. Then an unexpected voice broke the silence. "She is telling the truth." Every head turned toward Rachel. The young coordinator looked nervous, but she continued anyway. "During orientation, we studied the company archives. The original founder wore that silver pin, the same one Ms. Hayes has been wearing tonight." Her voice trembled slightly. "I should have spoken sooner." Madison offered her a gentle smile. "You spoke when it mattered." Rachel felt relief wash over her. Vanessa looked around the room and realized something alarming. The crowd was no longer looking at Madison with doubt. They were looking at Vanessa with questions. Allison opened another document. "There is more." The room became still again. For the last 15 years, several employee scholarship funds, emergency family assistance programs, and educational grants have been personally financed by Ms. Hayes through a private foundation. Shock spread across the ballroom. Many employees knew those programs. Some had benefited from them directly. Few knew who funded them. Robert Mercer nodded. She requested complete anonymity. The company received the credit because she believed the mission mattered more than recognition. A hush fell across the room. Madison never interrupted. She never boasted. She simply stood there while the truth revealed itself. One executive slowly removed his glasses. Another looked visibly emotional. Vanessa swallowed hard. The story she had built throughout the evening was collapsing piece by piece. Yet Madison did not move to humiliate her. She did not demand apologies. She did not attack anyone. Instead, she addressed the room. "Tonight is not about revenge," she said softly. "No company becomes stronger by replacing one mistake with another." The words carried through the ballroom with remarkable weight. People listened differently now. Not because of her ownership. Not because of her authority. Because of her character. The room that had once seen a stranger now saw the founder. The woman they had dismissed as unimportant had become the person everyone wanted to hear. And for the first time that evening, Madison Hayes was no longer standing outside the story. She had become its center. The ballroom remained quiet long after Madison Hayes finished speaking. The energy that had once been filled with judgment had transformed into reflection. No one seemed interested in returning to casual conversations. The truth had changed the room. Allison Grant exchanged a glance with Robert Mercer before addressing the board. "In light of tonight's events, an internal governance review will begin immediately. The procedures that allowed this situation to occur must be examined." Her tone was professional, not punitive. Several board members nodded in agreement. No one objected. Vanessa Caldwell stood near the stage, listening in silence. For the first time all evening, she appeared smaller, not because anyone had attacked her, but because the certainty she once carried had disappeared. Madison could have demanded immediate consequences. She could have publicly embarrassed Vanessa in the same way she had been embarrassed. Instead, she chose another path. "No one is being removed tonight," Madison said. The statement surprised nearly everyone. A murmur spread across the room. Madison continued, "Accountability matters. But accountability is not the same as humiliation. We will review decisions, policies, and leadership practices. We will correct what needs to be corrected. That is how strong organizations grow." The room listened carefully. Even Vanessa looked up. Madison turned toward Ethan Walker. The security chief immediately straightened. "Mr. Walker," she said, "you followed instructions that should never have been given. I hope tonight reminds all of us that procedures must never replace judgment." Ethan swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." Then Madison looked toward Rachel Bennett. "And I would like everyone to recognize someone whose integrity stood out tonight." Rachel froze as hundreds of eyes turned toward her. "Speaking up is not easy when there is risk involved," Madison said. "Character often reveals itself in quiet moments when no reward is guaranteed." Rachel felt her eyes grow moist. The applause that followed was genuine. Unlike the applause earlier in the evening, this one carried respect. Madison then announced the creation of a new leadership initiative designed to train managers and executives to recognize bias, encourage ethical decision-making, and protect employees who raised concerns in good faith. The idea received immediate support from investors and board members. What began as an evening of exclusion was slowly becoming an opportunity for improvement. One by one, people approached Madison. Executives apologized. Employees thanked her for programs they never knew she funded. Investors spoke about the values that had originally attracted them to the company. The atmosphere felt entirely different. The founder they had overlooked was now the person everyone wanted to hear. Yet Madison accepted every conversation with the same humility she had displayed when standing alone outside. Across the ballroom, Vanessa watched it all. Nobody mocked her. Nobody celebrated her embarrassment. In many ways, that made the lesson more powerful. She realized that the woman she had tried to exclude possessed something far greater than ownership or authority. She possessed trust. The kind of trust earned over decades of sacrifice, consistency, and service to others. Wealth could purchase influence. Titles could create power. But neither could create the respect that now filled the room around Madison Hayes. Vanessa slowly lowered her eyes. For the first time that evening, she understood the true cost of her mistake. She had not failed because she underestimated a founder. She had failed because she judged a person before understanding their character. As the evening continued, the atmosphere inside the Grand Monarch Hotel felt entirely different from the one that had existed only a few hours earlier. The celebration was no longer centered on stock prices, corporate achievements, or executive titles. Instead, it had become a reminder of the values that had built Hayes Innovations in the first place. Madison Hayes stood near the stage, speaking quietly with employees, investors, and longtime partners. For the first time that night, she felt the purpose of the anniversary returning to where it belonged. It was never meant to celebrate power. It was meant to celebrate people. A few minutes later, Vanessa Caldwell approached her. The ballroom gradually grew quiet as guests noticed the interaction. Vanessa no longer carried the confidence that had defined her earlier behavior. She looked tired, reflective, and sincere. For several seconds, she struggled to find the right words. Then she finally spoke. "I owe you an apology." The room remained silent. Vanessa lowered her eyes briefly before continuing. "Not because of your position. Not because of your ownership. I owe you an apology because I failed to treat you with basic respect. I judged you before I knew you. And I allowed my assumptions to become decisions." No one interrupted. No one laughed. Madison listened patiently. "There is no excuse for what happened," Vanessa said. "And I accept responsibility for my actions and whatever consequences follow." Madison studied her for a moment and then nodded. The willingness to accept responsibility is where real growth begins. Vanessa gave a small, grateful nod. There was no dramatic confrontation, no public humiliation, just a difficult truth finally acknowledged. Nearby, Rachel Bennett was still trying to process everything that had happened. She never expected her decision to speak up would be noticed. Yet before the evening ended, Madison invited her to join a newly created leadership development program that would work directly with senior management. Rachel was stunned. "I do not know if I am qualified," she admitted. Madison smiled. "Skills can be taught. Integrity is harder to find." Tears formed in Rachel's eyes as she thanked her. Across the ballroom, Ethan Walker also received an opportunity. Madison asked him to help redesign company security and guest verification policies to ensure that respect remained part of every procedure. The gesture surprised him deeply. Instead of punishment, she had chosen improvement. As the gala neared its conclusion, Madison finally stepped onto the stage that had been prepared for the anniversary celebration. The room rose to its feet. The applause was long and genuine. Looking across the crowd, she thought about her father. She thought about the tiny office where everything began. She thought about the promise she made 20 years earlier. In that moment, she realized that what she wanted most had never been recognition. It was confirmation that the values he taught her still mattered. The ballroom lights reflected softly against the old silver company pin resting on her jacket. She smiled and looked out at the people whose lives had become connected through a dream that started with almost nothing. The room grew still as she spoke her final words. "The greatest success is not building a company. It is building a culture where every person is treated with dignity." And that night, everyone remembered that respect is not earned by status. It is earned by the character to see value in others before the world tells you who they are.